right now, so that you have that information. And if for some reason we get a little bit short on time, we will be sure and answer your questions and follow up with you later. All right, without further ado, I would like to introduce our mayor, Diana Mahmud. Before she starts, she was first elected to City Council in 2013. She is actually she was the 8th woman to be elected to City Council. So in 2013, in this history of the city, we only had 7 women before Diana. She went to UCLA and got her law degree from UC Davis. She is retired after a long career with several agencies, including the Metropolitan Water District, and she's lived in South Pasadena for at least 25 years if the website is correct. But without further ado, Diana, thank you so much for taking the time this evening, and we really appreciate you joining us.
Of course, it's my pleasure. As Lori noted, this is my 8th year on council, and you can do an awful lot. You can go in different directions based on your interest. I was interested in running because I had been on the Natural Resources and Environmental Commission, and the commission had passed some proposed ordinances. We had actually gone to the work of developing 2 separate ordinances, and they just languished at City Council, and then we were and then I spoke in public comment about what I thought was a really horrible contract, global water contract. And,
Diana, excuse me, Diana, your audio is kind of weird. Is it just me, or is it?
You can't hear. Okay, I tell you what,
that's better.
Well, let me go to my more reliable audio. And is this any better?
So much, yes.
Okay, very good. So my focus has really been on environmental issues. And to that end, I, subsequent to being elected, really, as I started saying, the position is very flexible. You can pursue your interests. Mine have been environmental. And so at one point, I was chair of the San Gabriel Valley Water Policy Committee. I wanted to develop succession planning. So I've recruited somebody else to now serve as chair. And I am now vice chair. And as you may know, I am chair of the Clean Power Alliance, which at this point provides energy to not only South Pasadena, but 30 other cities in Southern California and the counties of Los Angeles and Ventura, as well as the counties, the unincorporated areas of the counties of Los Angeles and Ventura. And I'm very, very proud of the fact that CPA is already meeting the state's greenhouse gas, basically renewable portfolio standard for 2030, even though it's just even though we achieved this 10 years ago. So through our residents' ability to purchase their energy through us, we have significantly decreased, we've enabled our residents to decrease their greenhouse gas footprint through their consumption of electricity. And for so many of our residents, that's the easiest and most effective way for them to do so. So I would be happy to talk more about that, but I know you want to hear about this year. So I'm going to transition now. And I've identified, I think, about 8 major issues that are before City Council. And let me start with probably the one that most of you are interested, that's most timely, and that is regarding the hiring of a new city manager. When I was interviewed by Ben Tansey at the end of last year, I described one of the most important personal goals of mine was restoring the city to stability. The city had gone through a lot regarding the controversy for our former city manager, the uncertainty regarding the city's finances. And I really think that the city has been very well served by our interim city manager, Sean Joyce, not only because he has so many years of experience, but also he really understands South Pasadena, and he still has South Pasadena, you can readily tell, he has a soft spot in his heart for South Pasadena. And so I think with Sean, as well as finally being able to get on top of some of the financial issues, I truly believe that we have gone a long way to restoring the city to stability. We still have an awful lot of important issues, certainly ahead of us, as I will describe, but I think everyone should feel better and hopefully has more trust in city government than they did before. And I think trust more than anything else is probably what we need to make sure that our residents have in us. If our residents distrust us, then that just leads to all sorts of problems. So last Saturday, City Council interviewed 5 semifinalists. These are people that were screened by our recruiter. And I'm very pleased to say that City Council unanimously agreed on the selection of 2 finalists, and they will be interviewed next week, next Thursday, April 8th. I can't tell you much about them, but I can say one, they are both originally from the San Gabriel Valley. One of them is close to the end of his career, and he has served as city manager in other jurisdictions and wishes to return to Southern California. Another one is mid-career, but with a specific economic development background. So we believe, and as I said, it was a unanimous choice among the 5 of us to select these 2 candidates for the final interview, and that will take place Thursday, April 8th. I know there's also a lot of interest in the hiring of a new police chief, and subsequent to the public forum that was held recently, we've had so many, everything just kind of runs together in my mind. The application is out on the street and it closes April 15th. Sean is very experienced. I haven't specifically discussed this with other city council members, but given the fact that Sean is so familiar with our city and that he has had certainly experience hiring and letting go of police chiefs in his past, I personally am hopeful that there will be a sufficiently clear candidate that enables him to be in the position of making that decision. And as you may recall, the only 2 individuals that are directly hired by City Council are the city manager and the city attorney. The city manager is responsible for hiring every other department head. So I guess at this point, I will take any questions that you may have regarding those 2 topics. And if not, then I'll move on.
Anybody have any questions for Diana on the city manager or police chief issues? Okay.
All right, finance. This is so frustrating. I don't know if any of you watched our last city council meeting, but unfortunately, one of the city's servers crashed after midnight when Elaine Aguilar, who is our assistant city manager as well as acting finance director, the server crashed, and so Spectrum was unable to broadcast. And so we were unable to proceed because we're required to have public access. And obviously, if we're not broadcasting in these pandemic conditions, it's not a public meeting. So the city is going to be voting on our 2021 budget at the next council meeting next week. I am happy to report I'm happy to report that with reduced expenditures, particularly in community services, we are expecting a 57,000 budget surplus after deducting a one-time payment arising out of our execution of a contract for assignment of outstanding cell leases that resulted in a one-time bump of about $4.4 million to city revenues. Measure A, the 0.75 sales tax, and Sally, I know you worked on it, and for all those others that I don't recall right now, but certainly Sally immediately comes to mind, that really saved our bacon. We were able to obtain enough revenue from the augment of Measure A that we are not facing the financial meltdown that we were apprehensive of at the time that we first encountered COVID. And then, as you all know, when the pandemic conditions continued and the conditions only got more restrictive, we really didn't know what to expect, but we are really in decent shape. The draft fiscal 21-22 budget is anticipated to be reviewed by City Council in early June, with approval either in late June or early July. And as you may recall, our fiscal year runs from July 1 to June 30th. Our 2021 CAFR, which is the Certified Audit of Financial Records, I think, Gary, if I have that correct.
Certified Annual Financial Report.
Thank you very much. I knew you would know. That has been delayed, unfortunately. Our finance is a very small department. Some of our folks came down, they had some health issues. I believe we're now fully staffed, but that delayed our ability to prepare that. And that is anticipated to be released sometime in July. So that is finance. Let me go on to housing and the general plan. Approval of the general plan, including the commercial elements for both Fair Oaks and Mission Street, is anticipated for towards the end of this year. The housing element, which is part and parcel of that, must be approved by City Council before October. And so that will take priority. That's a statutory requirement that we have to approve that by October. But beyond that, we will continue working on the general plan. As you may recall, pursuant to the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA, the city is required to plan for 2,067 new housing units. It used to be 2,062, but one city in Los Angeles County was successful in appealing their RHNA number, and there's a distribution of their housing units to all the other cities, and so ours increased by 5. Also, to recap, Mission Bell, planned for the corner of Mission and Fair Oaks, which would yield its mixed-use project with 36 housing units. That has an estimated completion sometime in 2023. 65 Fair Oaks, which would provide for 86 senior housing units, and I believe about 13 of those are designated for senior housing. They haven't submitted construction plans yet, and so when I checked with staff, staff is a bit more uncertain with regard to its construction horizon. 7 patios, which would provide for 60 housing units, and is also a mixed-use project, is also likely to be completed sometime in 2024, probably towards the end of 2024. An inclusionary ordinance was passed in draft form by our Planning Commission at its meeting earlier this month and will be considered by City Council at our meeting next week. And I have to say, I asked for this, I think, when Sergio Gonzalez was city manager, and it's taken a long time, and I regret that it's taken us so long, but we've had some challenges in some of our departments, and planning is one of them. I think now our planning staff is in much better shape, but they have a ton of work to do, and that's part of the reason why things have been delayed to the extent that they have. At its most recent meeting on March 17th, Council passed an amended ADU ordinance. This liberalized certain elements of our existing ADU ordinance. And there will be additional refinement regarding the addition of ADUs for historic properties that will be considered by City Council later on this year. And so I will again stop now to see if anybody has a question.
Diana, I'd love to put in some questions now. I know Sam Burgess had a question about K-Rails. So Sam, if you want to unmute yourself and maybe ask that question directly to Diana, that would be great. If Sam is there, I will unmute him. We'll come back to Sam. Lisa, I know you had a question about art in the city. If you
I
wanna
did. My question was, how do you see, Diana, the arts aligning with business and the goals of the city?
I plan to discuss economic development, Lisa. Let me put a pin on that and try to answer it in the scope of discussion on economic development.
Okay, great. Because we could put art on manhole covers, you know.
Yeah, right now I'm looking for questions on finance or housing, but not Caltrans housing. That's coming up.
Sally has her hand up. Sally? You're muted.
Diana, you said Measure A saved the city. Well, pretty much that's the business saving South Pasadena, right?
Yes.
Thank you,
Yes,
business.
clearly. Yes, exactly. Thank you so much.
Sam Hernandez, you had a question about the Mission in Fremont, Jason's, the Caro's property.
Has that been approved? Corner
It
there.
has, it has not yet been submitted. I'm the council liaison to the Planning Commission, and it has not yet been submitted to planning for approval. So I anticipate sometime this year it will be considered by planning, but I don't really know when.
And has there been any signs of anything happening on the opposite corner, or pumpkin patch, as we call it? Nothing.
Yeah, no, you know, Sergio Gonzalez told me long ago when I inquired that the property owner is capable of just sitting on his asset. And he's doing a really good job of that.
And I understand he passed away, but now his son has taken over. Okay. Thank you.
Sally, did you have another question? Okay. Any other questions on housing or finance? If not, Diana?
Okay, I will move on to transportation then. We've got numerous things in the works. I'm so pleased, hopefully you already know about this, but the city received a $6 million grant for Fremont Avenue. That is really exciting. Also, we're developing an RFP for a study that would consider various alternatives that would consider how best to facilitate traffic flow on Fair Oaks. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to consolidate vehicular traffic on Fair Oaks so that we can we provide an incentive for vehicles to not use Fair Oaks or Fremont And so I think it'll be really important to consider how best to do that. And also, obviously, for businesses, to the extent that vehicles aren't cutting through residential area, that provides for greater visibility of those businesses that are located on Fair Oaks Avenue. I will note, unfortunately, Public Works is challenged due to the loss of both deputy public works directors, one relocated to another city outside of the region, and another received a promotional opportunity to serve as public works director in another city. Now, I know it took us a while to find what Stephanie then thought was an appropriately qualified public works director. I know we have had a solicitation on the street. I'm not sure of the status of that, but at this point, to the extent that you've had any requests of Public Works, I would ask for your continued patience because at this point, Public Works continues to be shorthanded. We have hired some consultants, but it's just not the same as having staff. And as you may know, for years, the city would go through and they would approve street maintenance projects. And unfortunately, Public Works got further and further behind in processing those projects. And so for last year's budget, last year being really this year, fiscal year 2021, City Council did not budget for any capital improvement projects. And this was number one, because we were so uncertain as to the state of our finances, but also that had the secondary benefit of giving Public Works some time to catch up and to actually accomplish the budgets that were in the queue. And so that is what is happening with transportation. And Sam, I see you had a question. Is there a study on the loop? Yes, that study that I referenced that would examine the various alternatives to facilitate traffic flow will consider the loop as one of a number of alternatives identified by the consultants and developed for further study.
And those funds are being approved by Caltrans for the study?
No, my understanding is that we have to use some of our funds, but once we move to implementation of the project, that the funds will be reimbursed by Metro. And Larry, the chair of Mobility and Transportation Infrastructure Commission, I see as a participant, and Larry will correct me if I have said anything incorrect. So certainly, Larry, if I'm wrong, please don't be shy about correcting anything that I've said.
Diana, I couldn't have said it better myself. It was spot on.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, but don't be shy, like I said.
No worries.
Okay. Let me move on to economic development.
Before you do, Tucker had a, sorry, Diana, Tucker had a question. Tucker, would you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Okay, for the Fair Oaks that we were just talking about, will bikes and pedestrians be prioritized like we've been talking about throughout the city? Or is it only vehicles, only cars and trucks that are going to be optimized?
I think that will be considered in the study. My personal feeling is to the extent that what we're really trying to do is provide relief for our residents on Fremont and on Meridian. And unfortunately, I think there's an inherent trade-off between accommodating pedestrians and bicyclists. I'm not sure that we have enough capacity to do both. And certainly we are trying to prioritize, for example, on Fremont, the grant is to develop Fremont as a complete street. So in terms of a north-south corridor, the intent, the priority, I think, will be to make sure that there is ample safety provisions for not only pedestrians, but also residents as well as bicyclists on Fremont. And hopefully we can do the same with Meridian. We don't have the funding yet, but the goal ultimately, I believe, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Larry, but I believe ultimately where the city would like to be would also be, obviously on a smaller scale on Meridian, is to also make that a complete street.
Yeah, I would agree, Diana. And I would just say about Fair Oaks, to Tucker's question, that there are a couple of projects on Fair Oaks. There's the one that Diana mentioned, the study to figure out which options are the best options for improving vehicular movement on the street. But there's also a project funded by Rogan Funds of approximately 9 million. Most of that is to implement intelligent transportation systems on the street. But there are pedestrian and cyclist safety improvement aspects to that project as well. I can't specifically identify them for you as I sit here, because we put out an RFP and we have bids came in. But between the Rogan project and the ultimate project that's going to come out of the study that Diana mentioned, there will be improvements for cyclists and peds on Fair Oaks. But like Diana said, I think that the hope is that some of these other streets will be used by bicyclists, and will be complete streets that can be used by various modes, whereas Fair Oaks, perhaps maybe the focus can be vehicular traffic, but there will be accommodations for other modes as well. I just don't know exactly what they're going to be yet.
Okay, any
thank
other
you.
questions on transportation? Gary, you need to unmute yourself.
The question is, could you, in lay terms, explain what a complete street means?
Again, Larry, you are probably more conversant with
How
this
did I
than
know you were
am.
So
But
oh, go ahead.
I'll start it and then you can finish it. But basically, it's a street that provides for safety element. It places a much higher priority on safety elements. I think everyone would agree that really up until very recently, streets have been viewed primarily as areas that are primarily used for vehicles, and the dual or triple use by pedestrians or by cyclists has been really an afterthought. And so I view complete streets as taking a holistic view of the geographic area that is occupied by the street to provide for accommodation of pedestrians, cyclists, as well as vehicles.
So
Yeah,
safe access for everybody.
Yes.
And I would just tack on quickly and say that it's implementing various measures to make a street as easy to use for bicyclists and pedestrians and other modes as vehicles. So to be concrete, no pun intended, it would be things like bike lanes or curb extensions or pedestrian crossing enhancements at important intersections, various devices that can be used to calm the vehicular traffic and provide paths for other modes as well. And bike lanes is just one example. Hopefully that helps.
Okay. Let me move on then, if there's no other questions on transportation, to economic development. This is such a challenging area. I know just during my term on city council, I recall the chamber had a 2010 economic study, and then while Stephanie was city manager, we had another economic development study, and it's been very challenging to see something really gel. I have to say I am very much, I think we're at a critical time of transition because of a couple of things happening. And these trends, I think, have only been accelerated due to the pandemic. I personally believe that we will see some permanent changes in lifestyle as a result of the pandemic. I think that it's going to be increasingly challenging for retail stores to continue to do business as they have before. And so I think it's important for them to find a niche. And I think it's very illuminating that the two ribbon cuttings that the chamber recently hosted are for really unique niche stores. And I can't tell you how pleased I was. I attended the ribbon cutting for Lucha Libre. I ran across a man who is such a staunch fan of Lucha Libre. He drove down from Santa Rosa. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is, I think, at least a 7-hour drive. But I think to the extent that South Pasadena is able to continue to attract destination stores like that, it will really help to not only make sure that they survive, but also I'm hoping that there will be a synergistic effect with other cities, because obviously to the extent that you bring people into town, that has the potential, I think, for people to find other things to do in town and to spend their money in town. Lisa, I also remember at one of the events, and I think it was during one of the arts crawls, we ran into two women that had flown into town. They were there for a production, and they were just enamored of the play. And I believe they came from someplace like Indiana. And so I think to the extent that the city is able to continue to develop things that are really unique in the city, that will definitely help to drive traffic into the city and be not only bring business to those particular niche businesses, but I think that other adjacent businesses can profit from those niche businesses bringing in other businesses. I'm also so pleased to see the extent to which Pete Kutzer's investment at the Mission Fair Oaks intersection has really invigorated that corner instead of a moribund bank, even though I know people at first were complaining, some residents complained, oh, they're just chains. They're still busy. I've seen so much activity. I'm really, really pleased, and I'm very hopeful that we will continue to see other areas of the city reinvigorated like that. And among other things, I'm hopeful that even though it's, as I said, some years down the road with the mixed use projects that are part and parcel of Mission Bell as well as 7 patios, I really think we have the potential to achieve that. Retail is changing, and I think they need to offer something different to bring customers in. And I think that's part of the reason why the 2 stores that I mentioned decided to, number one, open up their doors and also locate in South Pasadena. Another change that I anticipate that will be permanent as a result of our pandemic is we have probably I would guess the majority of our residents are white collar employees. And I believe the majority of our residents will continue to work from home to some extent. I don't anticipate at all that most employers will return to a 4 or 5 day, you have to be in the office. We absolutely will not allow you to work from home environment. And I remember when I was speaking to one prior economic development consultant, she was talking about the challenges that some of the restaurants in town had because we lacked that significant presence of people in town during the day, so that the restaurants could attract more business during lunch, so that their margin is greater. We don't know yet, since we're still living with pandemic restrictions on capacity, but I am really hopeful that that represents a permanent change. Not to mention, ultimately, once these new projects are completed, obviously, that's a significant addition of new residents into town. And like I said, we have to plan at least for the addition of 2,067 additional housing units beyond that. So I think that that the combination of those factors definitely help to boost economic development. In response to your question, Lisa, I think the city can do more. Certainly we saw, we had a gifted cultural arts programming director in Steve Felstead, and he brought a lot of people into the city. One of the things that was personally frustrating for me is that that wasn't taken to what I saw as the logical next step of trying to build some sort of business opportunity linked with that. And so one thing that I would like to see is the city eventually being able to do more programming, maybe not to the extent that we had it before with Steve, but certainly to a much greater extent, and to think creatively as to how to maximize business opportunities from themes that would be developed from those cultural programs. I'm also hoping that with South Pasadena, again, like I said, being better known as this kind of quirky town that has these unique shops, that there's something that we can do there. And certainly also with regard to what the city can do. And this provides a nice segue into Caltrans houses. Certainly, we want to remain a hospitable place for our artists to not only work, but also to live. And we know that unfortunately, the cost of housing is very, very high in South Pasadena. I don't know if this is legally possible. If you attended our community forum that was co-hosted with Senator Portantino last night, one of the attorneys spoke about potential restrictions on how we select people. But for example, to the extent that we can identify a preference in affordable housing, for example, for artists, that's something that I think the city could do. And as I tried to make abundantly clear in the presentation last night, all that SB3, well, let me back up. SB 381, which the city asked Senator Portantino to introduce, would grant to the city the ability to acquire unoccupied homes and those not purchased eventually by current tenants at Caltrans acquisition cost. The city would prioritize the acquisition of the unoccupied homes because those are, quite frankly, the ones that are the most run down, the most dilapidated, and also the most problematic for the neighbors who are concerned about the potential for people breaking in, starting fires, and all of the like. Nobody likes to live near an abandoned home. That I think everyone readily understands. This would accomplish two things. One, it would allow the city to proceed in a thoughtful, methodical manner to rehabilitate those homes. And it would also provide additional time for current tenants to acquire the financing to purchase their residence. One really important aspect of SB 381, as we are going to propose that it be further amended. And, there's an ad hoc committee of council members consisting of Council Member Jack Donovan and I, and we are assisted by City Manager Sean Joyce, the housing consultant, Adam Elison with his partner Grant Heminger, as well as staff Joanna Hankemer and Lucy Demergen. We are going to propose that the bill be further amended to provide a priority to non-income qualified tenants. Under the Roberti waterfall, as it's called, there's very specific priorities in terms of who has the ability. There's a very specific pecking order as to who is granted first opportunity to purchase and who's second, third, fourth, etc. At this time, income qualified tenants, which it maxes out, the highest priority is given to the lowest income tenants, and then it goes up in steps from there to the point that a tenant that is at 150% of LA County median income has the opportunity to purchase the property before the property is offered to a housing related entity. All those people have the ability to acquire before the city. And as we originally proposed that SB 381 be introduced, the city did nothing to change that. One thing that we are now proposing being changed is that if you were a non-income qualified tenant, and that means someone that is earning more than 150% of the median of the LA County median income, you didn't have the opportunity to purchase your Caltrans home until after the home was offered by Caltrans to housing related entities for development as affordable housing. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to protect all of our current South Pasadena tenants so that those that are making in excess of 150% of median income now will be treated the same as the other income qualified tenant and enjoy the same priority to purchase their home before a housing related entity steps in. At that point, whether or not the properties are developed for sale or developed as rentals will be something that will be the subject of robust community input. And as you may have heard, if you listened to the forum last night, for example, one suggestion was giving preference to South Pasadena residents. Another suggestion was giving preference to graduates of SPHS. Another suggestion that I just made was maybe earmarking some, giving a priority to artists. So there's lots of ways of slicing and dicing, and whether or not it would be either for sale or for rental is something, again, that would be the subject of robust community input. Also, and I want to make this crystal clear, there are some homes that are in the Caltrans inventory. There's currently 68 homes that are both occupied and unoccupied. And I believe it's 27 are listed in the city's inventory of historic resources. When the city rehabilitates homes, to the extent that the city acquires them, the city would be held to exactly the same standards of rehabilitation that it would expect of any other property owner. This is a good opportunity for me to also add that previously, back in 2019, when Caltrans first introduced what it then introduced as phase one, whereby some of the properties were sold by Caltrans at that time in 2019, the city recommended that Caltrans delegate to the Preservation Foundation the responsibility to ensure that appropriate covenants for historic properties were observed, and Caltrans agreed to do that And we would certainly expect that the Preservation Foundation would continue to act in that manner with respect to all 68 Caltrans properties, whether or not they're acquired by the current tenants or by the city. I know there's been some questions as to, well, how is the city going to pay for this? And number one, certainly, as we have proposed it, going after the unoccupied homes makes it easier because we're dividing it up. Also, since 2019, the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments has established, pursuant to legislation that was passed by State Senator Susan Rubio, the city has joined a JPA, a Joint Powers Authority, that was established in the name of the San Gabriel Valley Regional Housing Trust. That trust initially was the beneficiary of direct appropriation that Senator Rubio negotiated. I believe it was $5 million. She is seeking additional appropriation, but moreover, there is additional funds that are available from the state. The state realizes we have an affordable housing crisis. And when the city joined this regional housing trust, it made abundantly clear to the regional housing trust that it intended to make application for financing of at least some of the existing Caltrans homes in our jurisdiction through the trust. And so the trust knows about this. They're expecting an application from us. I will also say that I know last year the cities of Arcadia, Pomona, and it might be Baldwin Park. There was one, no, Claremont, were successful in getting housing projects funded by this San Gabriel Valley Regional Housing Trust. It's something relatively new. Quite frankly, I had not heard of it until a couple of years ago when the concept was introduced at the COG, but these are beginning to be developed in other areas, and I think it affords a lot of potential for our city. And with that, I will stop and take any questions on either economic development or the Caltrans homes.
Sam Hernandez had a question, I think. Sam?
I believe, Diana, that you covered the question I had, which was how if Caltrans sells us, if they don't sell off the properties to the current tenants, then we can buy them at X amount of dollars. And from what I understand from yesterday's meeting, we will be picking them up at their original cost.
Yes.
And so that we then, on those that need to be repaired, they're
Right.
going to cost us an arm and a leg. And I literally mean an arm and a leg.
Right.
So then we then either become landlords ourselves or we sell. And if we do sell, can we sell them at current market value? Or do we have to then abide by the low cost housing? Your turn.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions there. Let me first clarify that at this point, I don't think that the city is really interested in being a landlord. The city would most likely contract with a housing related entity who would actually perform that work. There is also another entity that has since emerged that, frankly, until it was described to me, I was unaware of its existence. That's called a community land trust. And the consultant that is working with us, Adam, established one of these in the city of Irvine. And under the community land trust, the land is actually owned by the community land trust. It is a 501, either C3 or C4. And the community land trust, which is a separate and distinct entity from the city, either functions as an HRE, a housing-related entity, or it can contract with either a private management company or a nonprofit HRE. And the benefit of having a community land trust, at least as it functions in Irvine, and what I think makes it particularly attractive for South Pasadena, is that in Irvine, there is a board, because it's a nonprofit corporation. So pursuant to nonprofit law, it has to have a board. And the board presently consists of 2 representatives appointed by city council. They can either be city council members or individuals appointed by city council, several tenants, and then members of the community at large, so that you have a lot more robust oversight over the ways in which the properties are being managed and maintained. With regard to your second question about the city's ability to sell the property at fair market value, Senator Portantino was clear last night in describing that the administration, the governor, has insisted that is a quid pro quo for the city being able to obtain the properties at acquisition cost, that the properties would have a 55-year affordability covenant, which means that if they are sold, they have to be sold as affordable housing, and upon resale, the property has to be sold as affordable housing for the duration of that 55-year covenant. Now, what some in the Preservation Foundation have suggested, which I think, hell yes, quite frankly, if we can do this, why not? There's a concern, and I understand it. I think it's a reasonable concern. Having a home myself that was built in 1913, the cost of maintenance, even after you restore a home, there's still, it's just simply more costly to maintain an older home than it does to maintain a newer home. And so there's some concern that, maybe whoever, if the city acquires the property and it's subject to this 55-year covenant, whoever acquires it may be challenged in their ability to maintain it. So there's a suggestion that I believe Senator Portantino is going to run up the flagpole, quite frankly, with the administration to see whether or not this might work, whereby the city would have the ability to sell, say, and quite frankly, my suggestion is tailor this so that it is only applicable to historic homes, because I think that's where there's the greatest need for this type of provision. And also, I think potentially where there's the greatest return. If the city could sell the property that it acquired at acquisition cost, sell that at fair market value, and then have the obligation to invest in affordable housing, and that whatever that affordable housing would then carry that 55-year covenant. I think that's something that works. It kills 2 birds with 1 stone. It provides more revenue for the city to do affordable housing, while also ensuring that the historic properties are properly maintained.
That
And
holds true.
Diana,
I'm sorry. That holds true for all of the resale and purchases. What about rentals? Do we have to
Rentals
meet?
would also come with the 55-year
It
affordability
does.
covenant. Basically, the way that the bill is currently written, and as the administration directed that it be written, is that any property that the city acquires at acquisition cost carries this 55-year affordability covenant. Under the Roberti Act, there's this nebulous concept known as reasonable price. And unfortunately, there's really no specific guidelines or criteria to assist Caltrans in identifying what is a reasonable price. But I believe in most instances, the so-called reasonable price would be multiples of the Caltrans acquisition price, because these properties were acquired so long ago. With regard to the unoccupied property, our consultant identified the median cost of a single family residence was $38,000.
I remember that, and there was 39 single families, and I think there were 3 multifamilies too. So in any case, thank you, Lisa.
Diana, I just wanted to say that the creative community in South Pasadena, it would be a dream to have artists have affordable housing. I mean, you know, that just emphasizes that we are a creative community, but artists, you know, they don't have the money to live in
Right.
South Pasadena. So that would be, you know, I would die with a smile on my face if if that
It's
happened.
it's my suggestion, Lisa, but that's why it's so important to participate in the community meetings.
So
You know,
important.
Spark
Yes.
needs to get out there in numbers.
And you were talking about the library that Stephen was doing all those projects. I just wanted you to know, we actually had a meeting with the city about that, about Spark taking over the doing programming at the library, the Rialto, and the War Memorial. And it was the day that you had to shut down. So we're looking forward to keep having that meeting again with the city when it's available.
Well, and I'm really hopeful that there will be some creative thought into how do we maximize this? How do we drive business to our local businesses as a result of these cultural events?
Absolutely. And you know, this is the 25th year of having our Fremont Center Theater. And to tell the truth, 80% of our audience is out of South Pasadena for all those years. So, you know, we're bringing people in, and yeah, they want to go to interesting shops, interesting things, you know, so the more we have something that is exciting, I think that will help the income for everyone.
You don't
Ben,
look like Karen, Ben.
Ben, you have a hand up.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Mayor, is there an estimate for how much property tax the city has foregone over the decades of the Caltrans ownership? And is there any kind of estimate or even range for the cost of the rehab of the 68 properties?
The simple answer is no and no. And I think it's impossible, you know, because of Prop 13, I think it's really impossible to develop any kind of estimate, because it depends on your assumption as to how often, how recently the properties were sold. For example, my immediate next door neighbor, I believe, purchased his home in 1965. So you can imagine how much property tax he's paying. The neighbor across the street, I believe when that home, I forget exactly when they purchased that home, but the home is significantly undervalued on Zillow simply because it was acquired so long ago. So I don't even know how you would begin to estimate how much property tax was lost, because it so much depends upon the last date for reassessment. You'd have to just speculate wildly on all sorts of assumptions. And in terms of the estimate to rehabilitate, no. And that's part of the due diligence that the city needs to do. In the study that the Heritage Housing Partners, Charles Luffman, in July of 2019, I reading the report, it makes reference to an Excel spreadsheet that I haven't seen and I've asked to obtain. I believe there that he just made a generalization as to whether or not a property was in fair or poor, condition. But I also understand that the properties that would require the greatest investment are those that are not presently occupied. But certainly that would be part of the city's due diligence, and that's the work that the Civic Stone folks would do pursuant to the contract that will be considered by City Council at our meeting next week.
Thank you.
Um,
We're about an hour. If any other last minute questions?
Let me just close then on one thing. I know homelessness has been an issue for businesses as well as for residents. And I know that Care First is sponsoring a program a week from Thursday regarding a regional crisis response in the form of the CAHOOTS model that was initiated by the city of Eugene, Oregon, that has really gained nationwide prominence at serving. It's been very successful. And just real quickly, that model anticipates, that model consists of having a medical person, someone trained like a med tech, go out with a crisis counselor, and they're unarmed and they respond to calls. The calls are routed to a regular police dispatcher, and the police dispatcher makes the determination whether or not it's appropriate for the police to respond or for this CAHOOTS to respond. And I'm very pleased to tell you that I attended a meeting of the San Gabriel Valley Homelessness Committee last year, where we received a presentation by actually the same person who will be making the presentation that Care First is sponsoring next week. And the COG was really intrigued by the idea, and we now have a study that has been initiated. If you go to the city's Scoop, our blog, there's further information regarding it. It was posted March 29th. But my specific reason for drawing your attention to this is that the consultant is, there's a steering committee that essentially consists of various aspects of city staff, but there's also a community advisory committee. And I think it would be helpful if one or more business interests participated as a member of that community advisory committee. There will also be future community forums. Anyway, for further information and to get on the mailing list to find out more about this, please go to the city's Scoop as of March 29th. Also, a couple of months ago, maybe February, the COG sent a white paper to the county suggesting several specific improvements. And essentially, what the COG is trying to do is trying to provide more of a regional focus, trying to obtain more control over the Measure H dollars that are presently doled out by the County Board of Supervisors. And City Council recently sent a letter of support for that COG white paper. So, unfortunately, our unhoused, there aren't a lot of them, but I know sometimes they are problematic. I've received emails from some businesses regarding people at Library Park, people in front of La Fiesta Grande, and we're trying to do what we can, but it's really difficult when people are offered services repeatedly and refuse them. And you just have to be very patient, and it's like water on a stone. Just try. And keep your fingers crossed that eventually people are able to accept help.
Sam Burgess is back. I don't know if you can speak, Sam, but I know you had a question. he wanted to, Diana, he wanted you to talk on the future of the K-rails on Mission Street.
Oh, you know, I know the city submitted a request to divert the funding that had been established by Metro for Arroyo Fest, which was going to be the shutdown of the 110 freeway. That didn't happen. And among other things, we proposed to use some of that money for residential traffic calming measures, a study of the potential closure of Meridian between El Centro and Mission, as well as potential closure of one traffic lane on Mission. And I haven't heard any feedback yet as to whether or not Metro has approved that request. But it's an idea. I know it was proposed, I want to say probably about 15 years ago. And I think at that time, I know diagonal parking was proposed, and at that time there was a lot of resident resistance to that. I think today there might be less resident resistance, and I personally would strongly favor our funding the study if we have the money to see whether or not that's feasible. The one point of concern is, how do you address the backup of traffic at the Gold Line? That's the only potential fly in the ointment. But other than that, I really think it would be beneficial for our residents, beneficial for the business district, beneficial. I know, Sam, you are quite the walker, obviously beneficial to all of those that enjoy walking through our town. So I hope we can do something. And they're beautiful. They're beautiful, Lisa. Thank you so much to Spark for organizing that effort. They're very, they're just cheerful. They provided cheer at a time that we were in severe want of cheer.
And the artists appreciate it because the galleries are shut. So this is an outdoor gallery for them. So it was a 1-1 for everyone.
Right.
All right. Well, if there's no further questions, I just, again, want to thank Diana for taking the time to join us tonight, and thank everybody for your time, your comments, your attention. And again, thanks again for being here.
It is certainly my pleasure. And anytime that you have questions, you know where to find me.
There's a city council meeting next Wednesday.
Yes.
Good night, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Enjoy your
Thank you,
evening.
Diana.